All right, welcome back to Podcasting on a Plane. You've made it to episode number 4, and I'm starting this episode nearly speechless. You know, when I sat down to do this podcast, I was hoping that I could share my journey through aviation and share the experience of those that have mentored me and helped me, and share the experience of those that are leading the industry if they would be kind enough to give me the interview. But deep down, I was really hoping that anybody out there might actually sit down and listen. Well, the downloads have so far exceeded my hopes, and the feedback is starting to roll in. And as a matter of fact, the guy who sent in the first feedback ever, he's from Sweden. Yeah, I'm humbled. I mean, this is amazing. People are listening in Europe. Now, he heard about this podcast from APG, airline pilot guy, where Captain Jeff was kind enough to actually did a whole little bit on his show, where he played a little bit of an episode from my first episode, number 1 there, and to be honest, most of you probably heard about my show from him anyway, so extra special thanks to APG for that shout out. And Captain Jeff, if you're out there listening, you're the man. All right. And to all of you out there listening, thank you so much. You're helping me realize a dream that I've had, and I can't thank you enough. And also, how cool is this? I sat down to work ground and clearance delivery early in the morning the other day, and out of nowhere, I got an on-air live shout out from... Actually, I'm not sure who it was, but we'll worry about that later. But it was whoever was flying Alaska 250 on May 10th. You know what? I'll share with you guys. Listen to this.
Clearance Alaska 250.
Alaska 250.
Yeah, is that Brandon there? Hey, I just heard from you about some Captain Jeff there with Acme, and I like what you did.
Alaska 250, thanks. First on-air shout-out. Appreciate it. Have a good flight.
Take care.
Wow, what a treat. How cool is that? So whoever that was, the crew of Alaska 250 the other day, if you're listening, thanks, guys. You made my day. And actually, it was my Friday. So thanks for sending me out on my weekend on a high note. And I hope you guys had a fun time down in Puerto Vallarta. Earlier, I said we had feedback from Sweden. And here it is. Swedish Andreas, take it away.
Hi there, Brendan. This is Swedish Andreas with some feedback. I got to listen to your podcast by way of the Airline Pilot Guy podcast, and I got hooked with the first episode. As I have a 9-year-old son who I'm trying to get interested in aviation, your first episode really struck home. Just hope he doesn't have to crash to get the bug. Anyhow, here is a 2-part question regarding the air traffic controller part of your work. As a non-native English speaker, I was wondering how you guys handle situations when the proficiency in English isn't that good, and or when one of the parties is not speaking clearly enough on the radio. First question, have you ever found yourself in a sorry say again situation? And if so, as radio airtime often is a premium commodity, how did you resolve it in a timely manner? And second, have you ever had to act after the fact? Act as in contacting the FAA or any other authority regarding a case when the language was so bad it became a danger to the operations? Thanks for a great job, and please keep it up.
All right, Swedish Andreas, thanks for the questions, and also congrats on having a son. I wish you all the best on getting him interested in aviation, and I actually have 2 boys myself. The older of the 2, he's about to turn 6, and he's got the aviation sickness for sure. Matter of fact, last week, Grandma and Grandpa and his aunt, who was visiting from out of town, they bought the boys a couple of those giant foam gliders, you know, the ones with like the 4-foot wingspan where the wings kind of just stick in. We spent hours flying those around their property, and he got so good at throwing them that by the end of the day we were playing like a baseball toss game that you pretty much just used a glider instead of a ball. Actually, one of my earliest aviation memories came at a similar age. When I was about 5, my parents bought me this cargo plane playset. I still remember it. I wish I still had it. It was a Federal Express set, and it had the purple and white jet in the old 80s colors at the time, and some cargo cans and this little loader platform that put the cans into the plane, and you could wind them back with this little conveyor belt thing inside the toy jet. And I spent hours playing with it. And sometimes I'd actually set up a little control tower somewhere else in the room. And I found myself wondering what it would be like to work in the tower instead of flying the plane. And to be honest, I really wanted to do both. And while piloting was plan A, ATC was sort of I don't want to call it plan B. It was maybe plan A minus, plan A and a half. But since then, I've been lucky enough to do both. And I've loved doing each one. But the aviation bug was there for sure, even at age 5. And I also couldn't be happier, Andreas, that you sent me your comments in time to make it into this particular episode, because the interview portion later on we're talking with Jeff White. He's the president of a flying club, and he talks about how the aviation bug bit him young growing up in an aviation family, but how his kids, with total access to aviation and airplanes and flight instruction or whatever, they like it okay, but they just don't carry the same passion for it that we do. Now, the crash that I was in, that took what was already my plan A, and it turned it into something greater than a career. And Andreas, luckily for us, chances are virtually nil that either one of us, our children, or either one of our children will ever have to go through what I did, and that they'll both go on to do great things in aviation. And so I hope your boy ends up finding his passion for aviation and that it's something that you guys can share as he grows up. And I don't know, maybe having grandparents buy the airplane stuff is the magic ingredient. I don't know. But, for those of you that do have children, or anybody who's interested in aviation, but maybe doesn't want to do the pilot thing, I'd, of course, recommend looking into air traffic control. And wherever you are in the world, ATC seems to be a pretty excellent career path. The pay is good, benefits pretty good, whether you're private or governmental. And one of the things that I like about it the best is even if I'm not flying, I still get to wake up and come out to the airport every single day and be directly involved in the operations of airplanes, even if I'm not sitting in the pilot seat. But of course, the drawback for someone like me is that I wish I was in the pilot seat sometimes too. So at least I get to see my friends do it, and I still get to go to the airport every day, no matter what. So Andreas, to answer your actual questions, yes, I do run into the language barrier stuff all the time. And, some of the other reliever airports in my area have several flight schools, which have sort of evolved to specialize in forward pilot flight training. And as such, we have a large number of foreign nationals training in the San Diego area, also up in the LA area. And there are several flight schools up there that do the same thing. And my airport is right about at that magic 50-mile distance from LA, which qualifies a flight for cross-country time. So we do see an awful lot of foreign pilots making their first solo cross-countries to our airport. Now, since it's easy to recognize someone who isn't a native English speaker, most controllers use an attitude of, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And most controllers I know will do themselves the favor of speaking more slowly and clearly to this type of person. And that'll prevent problems from the beginning. Now, I might expect a professional pilot who speaks English to follow more complicated instructions, and I'll issue them in one transmission, but that's not something that you'd want to do with someone who obviously doesn't speak English as well as they speak something else. So with respect to your first question, yes, the say again thing does happen all the time, on both sides actually of the mic. Now, most foreign pilots are pretty good at understanding and memorizing the standard phraseology that we use in ATC, but there isn't always a memorizable phrase for each thing that we do. So we try to use our best judgment and phraseology for stuff that doesn't always have an exact recipe. And that's sometimes when the problems start. So for me, if a pilot says, say again, I go into a little self-check mode to make sure my phraseology wasn't sloppy. And if I think what was said was clear and followed the proper phraseology, well, then I'll just say it again the same way. And if it still isn't understood, well, then we're allowed to use more of a plain language approach to resolve a miscommunication. And to answer the second part of your question, the answer is simply yes. We have had some situations where it got a little bit too far and the language barrier became a big problem. And I'm not sure how much I should get into what exactly happened to me recently, since it was, pretty recent. But there may also be some legal stuff pending with respect to that incident. So in general, though, yeah, if somebody seems to be a danger due to poor language skills, we do actually report that. And it's to another part of the FAA, which is called the FSDO, or the Flight Standards District Office. And we write up a mandatory occurrence report of what happened, and then they go look into it. And what happened to me didn't actually just involve a language barrier. And again, I wish I could give you a little more information, but there was a lot of other stuff happening too. And some of it was probably cultural. And often that's actually the bigger issue, more than just the language thing. Now, there are differing attitudes towards authority and rules and compliance in different parts of the world. And to me, actually, it seems as if these attitudes sort of naturally fall towards the respect of air traffic control and the respect of regulations and policies and things. But sometimes the idea of questioning authority and rules is unacceptable in some cultures. And because of that, the pilot may just do what they thought that they heard us ask them to do instead of, asking and clarifying. And that's when the danger part comes in. So that said, I know how hard English must be to learn. I can only imagine what it would be like to come to the U.S. and to spend years here in a foreign land trying to learn good English at the same time you're learning how to fly professionally, and as well as partly assimilate into a culture that might be like a polar opposite to what you've known for your entire life. So while I can't speak for others, I do try to educate instead of reprimand when misunderstandings happen. And if it gets too bad, though, and action does need to be taken, a minimum standard does have to be met for this whole thing to work. So at which point, we'll report it to the FSDO and they'll take a look into it. Now, this brings us to a really interesting article from the UK, actually, from England. And it's been floating around the aviation community for like maybe a month and a half now. So it's been mentioned on other podcasts and you may have heard it. But for those who missed it, I'll put a link in the show notes. The headline, though, is "Poor English Skills Among Pilots Could Cause Air Disaster, Report Finds." That's the headline. The article goes on to read, "Poor English skills among some airline pilots and air traffic controllers could cause a disaster in the skies over Britain," a report has warned. Cheating on exams and corruption and inadequate testing were identified as key problems by an independent review carried out for the Civil Aviation Authority. Apparently, this watchdog group commissioned the report over concerns that a lack of fluency in English, which is, of course, the international standard for aviation, could lead to accidents over Britain and abroad. And it identified 267, wow, that's a lot, 267 mandatory occurrence reports related to miscommunication in UK-based aviation over an 18-month period. And in one incident, they had one where a guy taxied onto a runway without a clearance. There was one in the air where, there was confusion over left and right runway. And the report goes on to say, and quote, "For the safety of the UK traveling public, it's imperative that all pilots and controllers working in international aviation have the proficiency to communicate clearly and succinctly in all situations, routine and non-routine. Language-related miscommunication, including lack of ICAO proficiency standards, certainly has a potential to be the cause of serious accidents or serious incidents or even accidents," end quote. Now, ICAO, that's the International Civil Aviation Organization, operates the English language testing regime that pilots and controllers around the world have to match up to. So to work in international civil aviation, pilots and controllers are required to pass what's called like a level 4 exam, I guess. And that's intended to ensure a minimum standard of English ability. But this report finds that in non-UK pilots and controllers with below standard English skills had enough to suspect grounds of cheating on aviation exams or English exams. So in one country, candidates with no proficiency in English received their certificates after 10 days tuition, which is what they're calling, quote, "an impossible feat," end quote. And according to one of the report's contributors, the review also identified grounds to suspect that some non-native English speakers are not being tested, but instead are granted the level 4 certification on sweetheart deals, is the quotation mark there, like handshakes and friends, etc. And again, this article is from express.co.uk, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But wow, I'm speechless. Let's move on. Today we've got Jeff White on the show, and he's the president of a medium to large flying club. And flying clubs can be a really cost-effective way to learn to fly, or maybe to add a rating. And clubs can really have unique airplanes to rent, things that aren't available other places, and they can have a more laid-back atmosphere and attitude than places where, for instance, airline career training is really the main goal. So Jeff fits in nicely here with that description, and he's here to talk about how clubs can sort of represent flying freedom, but he also speaks to the great responsibility that comes with that freedom. And he also defends the idea that flying clubs are sort of like the Wild West or the cowboy country of training and rental. And for this episode, recording on site is something that's difficult. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the audio could be better, but you're going to hear a jet parking in the background. There's a plane taking off at one point, and actually one of the line guys even comes in and knocks on the door at one point. So whatever. I left it in there because I figured you'd rather hear the interview, and since we're all a bunch of aviation nerds here, we're just going to chalk all that hangar noise up to character, right? Okay. So let's listen to my recorded interview with Jeff White. And like I said, he's the president of PC Flyers, which is a medium to large club. And he's going to tell us all about the benefits and drawbacks of clubs and how each club is actually a completely different animal. And no two are really the same, even though we sort of stereotype them into one thing. And flying clubs come with, of course, their own unique set of challenges. But next to actual aircraft ownership, they might really be the next best way to exercise your freedoms as a licensed pilot in the United States. So Jeff's going to tell us about his club and the unique set of circumstances which led him to being the president of one.
All right, let's get the party started.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brandon. Glad to be here.
All right. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show because you're probably one of the busiest people I know. And you're the president of this club. You're the owner of multiple aircraft. You recently finished building an RV-6. Let's see, what else are you? You're a full-time instructor, full-time job outside of aviation, a father, aircraft builder, and probably a bunch of other stuff too. How do you do it all?
Well, I take a lot of cat naps. And long days are good, in this business. The aviation part of this is not something I have to get out of, force myself out of bed to do. I'm like going to an office job. So coming to the airport is kind of natural. In fact, if I don't go to the airport, after about 2 days, I start pacing around the house. I figure there's something that needs to be done that I'm not taking care of.
I know that feeling. So before we get too much into all the other things you do, I want to learn about how you got into aviation. What are some of your earliest memories?
Well, I grew up in an aviation family. My father worked for the FAA. He was an air traffic controller. He worked in, he was not unlike yourself. He worked in the control tower at Ryan Airport, which is where we grew up in Baton Rouge. And I remember he worked in the TRACON in Houston when they opened Houston International. I think that's now George W. Bush Airport. And then we ended up moving back to Baton Rouge, and he worked in the tower back at Ryan again. And anyway, him and his buddies had a little Piper Cub, I remember. And, my earliest memories were sitting in that little Cub while they were out hangar talking and just playing with the stick and, pushing the throttle in and out and thinking about what a great thing it was going to be one day when I could do that. I just loved it from the beginning.
How old were you when you finally got to the flying airplane?
Well, I got to do a little flying with him, 8 or 9 years old, 13, 14. But I took my first flying lessons in 1972. I was about 15 years old at that time. I was the only civilian in the ground school class. Everybody else were Army ROTC guys heading out to go to fly Hueys in Vietnam. So I was kind of a standout guy, and everybody else is in college, and here's this little 15-year-old guy in the class, which actually was cool. It gave me a little more broader world view of things. Hanging out with these older guys.
Absolutely. Obviously you had dreams of flying airplanes, but you didn't have any dreams of becoming a controller?
I thought about it a little bit. Where I grew up, and when we lived in Houston, we lived in a neighborhood that was nothing but FAA people. Everybody, all your neighbors, everybody, they all worked at that TRACON because they built it and just populated it all at one time. And I was just so immersed in it, I really never thought of the FAA as a career. I just wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly airplanes. And that's all I wanted to do. And I built thousands of model airplanes and thought about them, dreamed about them, built flying models, crashed a billion flying models before I figured out how to fly the darn things. So, just that was me, just being a kid. And, unfortunately, by the time I got old enough to think about a military career, and back in those days, that was your way to the airlines, was through the military. I didn't have 20/20 vision, and there were no options. So, I went to school and became a teacher instead because I knew I didn't want to go to the military and not fly. That was not an acceptable option for me. And these are the days back when the Vietnam War was still going on. So, and I didn't want to go be fodder in a rice paddy somewhere, which was what I thought would happen. That was how it was portrayed to us in the media in those days.
Of course. So, what about teaching appealed to you?
Well, I really like teaching. I really have a passion for it. What I like about it is passing on a skill, knowledge, and ability to somebody else. I really like to help people. And I'm, psychology terms, I have a people pleaser mentality. And to that end, I don't mind, as long as people are willing to do their part, the students doing their part, working and showing up, I'll walk 10 extra miles to help them achieve their goals here.
Sure. What did you teach?
I taught, it has nothing to do with aviation. I taught instrumental music for about 5 years back in the Baton Rouge school system.
Wow, any particular instrument?
My main instrument actually is the bass fiddle, the contrabass. And but when I found out when I started teaching, you have one of those if you're lucky, and you got 15 violin players. So I quickly had to backpedal a little bit, figure out how to play the violin pretty good.
So did you teach in Baton Rouge your whole career?
I did. When I moved to California in 1984, the very end of '84, and my plan was to become a music teacher out here and just carry on out here on the West Coast. But before I got a contract to teach, and it happened, it's kind of funny. I took a job with Hughes Aircraft working in their radar systems group, And with an education degree, there's still a lot of stuff you can do in the industry. And I was hired as a tech writer, so I became an editor in their technical publication, Tech Pubs department.
So you were the one who's responsible for writing those awful things?
Yeah, those terrible things. Well, nothing you've ever had to read. Those are all written in Japan.
There you go. So your willingness and your liking of teaching, did that motivate you to become a flight instructor after you had all your certificates?
It did. I got my private pilot certificate in '85. Prior to that, as being a teacher in Louisiana, you just couldn't afford it. Just didn't make enough money to pursue those kinds of things. So when I moved out to California and I started making a little bit better money, I realized that, hey, I've got enough left over here at the end of the month after I pay my rent. I could start my flying lessons again. And I did. I walked right down to Hawthorne Airport. That was the place that down the street, and went in the very first flight school I found, and the rest is history. I finished my private in about 3 months, 90 days. Wow. I had a whole childhood of reading about everything and kind of knowing the concepts. So it was just a matter of formalizing the training, and it was fun.
Sure. What about your other certificates and ratings? Did you finish all of them in rapid succession, or did you wait a while for those?
I waited a while. I did an instrument rating right after the private, and then I didn't think anything more about it. I went on and just bought a house, had kids, and flew around as a private pilot for about 20 years. And then one day, like a lightning bolt, it hit me. I've seen a lot of these instructors around, and I could do as good a job or better than them at this. And I was getting to a point where I wasn't being stimulated by just flying anymore. I was going to the same places and kind of became really routine and kind of boring. And I wasn't able to, like a lot of people, financially afford to fly that often. And I wasn't able to fly enough to keep my skills up. And I wasn't happy with how I was going. So I made a decision to either up my game or get out. And so I found a guy out here at Palomar that was willing to work with me to get my commercial. And I got that done. And then about a year and a half later, I started my instructor rating. And I got the commercial rating fully with 100% with the intent of moving on to become an instructor. So that was by then the plan.
Sure. So how on earth did you become the president of a big flying club?
Well, that's more by accident than by design. I'm not by nature a politician. And, in organizations, politics are important in many ways, shapes, and forms. I had become an instructor and had been teaching about a year. And I'd been teaching in this club for about 6 or 7 months. I had bought an airplane, and it was in the flying club. The plane was flying. I was able to teach in my airplane. And, I realized the little entrepreneur in me realized that if you teach in a club, you get to keep all the money you make that students pay you. The owner of the flight school doesn't get to go on his Caribbean vacations off of my labors. So you made more money per hour, enough to interest me at that point in my life. I was in my mid 40s, and it just wasn't interesting to work for $15 an hour like what the flight schools were paying. But it was interesting, and I was able to teach, and with my background and all that, I figured I wanted to be able to teach on my terms, in my way. I wanted to establish my own method of teaching because I have seen how the schools do it over the years, and it's not bad, but I had my ideas how I wanted to do it and how I could teach people to be better pilots, not just how to pass a check ride, but to become fully articulated pilots that have confidence to go to different airports, know what to do when they go to another airport. How do you get a crew car? The ins and outs of that. How do you avoid paying the ramp fee, by buying the gas? Or what are the code words to buy the gas that waive the ramp? All those little things that we all kind of know about when we fly around. And so that was kind of my mission, was to teach people how to be confident pilots, how to be functional, and also how to take care of the airplanes as well. How do you do engine management? How do you properly park an airplane without breaking off the nose gear? The things that dog a lot of the same day-to-day things that dog, our existence in the flying club. I see it all the time with people coming here, and they've passed a check ride somewhere along the way, and beyond that, they don't know what to do with it.
So it sounds like you were really able to take your experience and your love of teaching and your love of entrepreneurship and combine them into something that's both successful and lucrative?
It works really well. The airplanes, I'm lucky enough to have a regular job on the side, so I don't have to pay my mortgage with the money that the airplanes generate. And they do generate some money. They're also very expensive to maintain. So my plan has been, and it's worked so far, knock on wood, kind of thing. But anyway, I'm able to put all the money they make back into the airplane. So instead of just maintaining them, I'm able to actually improve them. So over the years, you buy these, 70s, and that's the meat potato of flying clubs, for the price point. People don't join clubs because they want to spend a ton of money flying. They join clubs because they're looking for value. So buying a moderately priced airplane with very common or even outdated communications equipment, and then slowly over time upgrading them has kind of been my little business plan, and it's worked out well. So the first plane I bought was a 172N model in 1977, millions of them out there, and it had these old Cessna ARC radios, which after I bought the plane I found out nobody works on anymore because they're kind of clunky. But the plane flew a lot because it was a new plane in the club. It was better than the other airplanes, and people liked it because they felt safe in it. And then when it started making money, I was able to take that money and buy better radios and then buy a GPS, a nice WASP GPS. I think it was the first WASP GPS anybody here had ever seen. And even got called out by some of the old instructors, because they didn't want to learn GPS. And it was like, why are you wasting your money on these fancy GPSs? You should be putting your money elsewhere, But I really had a mission. I wanted people to be able to learn on. Back in, that was 10 years ago, and the state-of-the-art, whatever state-of-the-art equipment there was, you could tell GPS approaches were coming, and they were going to be here to stay. And we needed to have those capabilities. So it wasn't hard for me to do that. It was like, okay, this is what our people need. Let's do it. And that's a win-win for us,
Yeah, well, so I like that you took the money, and instead of just saying, hey, I've got some cash, you reinvested it in your airplanes and your business.
Well, it's easy to do if you don't have any vices.
There you go. Now, doing stuff like that, though, do the airplanes kind of have any standardization between them, or do they kind of become just a little bit of everything all over the place?
No, that's the other thing. See, since I own, and my plan was never to own a bunch of airplanes. My plan was to acquire airplanes, improve them, and hopefully pass them on, and have club members buy them, and have them stay in the club, and they'd be nice, reliable airplanes. People would kind of know they would know the history of the airplane because it's been here. So, if you've ever bought an airplane and you're buying something sight unseen, that's a can of worms.
Sure.
And there's, and even the most expensive pre-buy will still leave most of the can of worms uncovered. So here are planes. They've been in the club for years. They've been flying. People have flown in them, got their ratings in them, and they know the history of the plane. They know that it's not full of corrosion. They know it's not breaking down all the time. It's a reliable machine. So with that model and acquiring a couple of planes, and I own a ton of them, and I don't own all of the airplanes in the club, and I have a couple of partners in some of them, but I'm able to also standardize them. Okay, they get the same. For me, it's not a plug, but the Garmin GPSs. I standardized on either Garmin 430s or 530s, and the Garmin audio panel, the Garmin 340 audio panel, which was that was the state of the art back 10 years ago. So those same audio panels and the same GPSs with the same knobs made it easier for people to go from one airplane to the other with some confidence. Because the typical kind of flying club model is it's a grab bag of airplanes, and every airplane's got totally different radios, and the intercom's over on this side of the panel in one, and it's on the other side of the panel in another, and everything's got different knobs, and trying to figure out how everything works is half the battle.
Sure. Now, a lot of people kind of walk around with the feeling that, like you said, it's a grab bag or sort of a cowboy country. Like whatever the planes are, that's just what they are. If the people choose to maintain them, that's their choice in flying clubs. And the flying clubs might lack the standardization of, for instance, like a larger flight school that mainly specializes in airline training. And that maybe some clubs are kind of like the Wild West where anything goes, right? What would you say to that?
Well, there is some truth to that because there are flying clubs that are like that, and flying clubs can exist like that. They're just clubs. But I can say that in this day and age, I know our club's not like that, not because I don't allow it. Our planes are all kept to the same standards as any flight school or any commercial operation. They get 100-hour inspections. Anytime anything's broken or needs to be replaced, we use that as an opportunity to improve the hardware that's in the plane. The old AC Delco alternator goes out in the Cherokee, where we're going to put a new plane power alternator in it. Much more reliable, lighter. Same goes for batteries and all the kind of mundane things that wear out on airplanes. And there are a lot of moving parts that wear out. And when we can, we try to make it better, not maintain the status quo. Because what was good 50 years ago, and a lot of these planes are 50 years old, may not be as good as what's available today.
Not surprising. And let's talk about learning to fly in a flying club. Again, the lack of standardization, I know that kind of is off-putting to some people, despite the fact that it might be less expensive to fly at a club. Speak a little bit about how the instructors in this club operate as far as a standardized syllabus and as far as the way they conduct their flight training.
Well, each instructor in the club is allowed the latitude to establish their own curriculum. So there is no standardization of the syllabus in the club. This is all the training here is done under Part 61, so it's one instructor with one student. It's kind of like the model of a personal trainer. So the instructors are free to set up, just like I said I wanted to do earlier in the interview, establish a way to teach people their way. And you'll find anymore that the more experienced instructors are all in the clubs because it's the only place they can make a decent wage per hour. Flight schools, the economics of aviation didn't keep up with the rest of the cost of living of the country. And, in the 70s, you can make a decent living working at a flight school. The hourly rate a flight instructor made was enough to actually kind of raise modestly, albeit modestly, but they could raise a family on it. But the rates stayed the same while in stagflation in the 70s and inflation in the 80s took its toll on the buying power of that dollar. And nowadays, I think flight school flight instruction is really the domain of the young. Generally, the only people that can really afford to do it much are people that are young people still living at home that are just need to build flying hours, and they don't stick around. As soon as they can, they leave because the next job pays a lot more.
Okay, so would it be a true statement then that most of your instructors in your club are not mainly airline-bound young types, but who are they?
Most of the instructors in our club are long-term, full-time flight instructors. That's what they do. That's what they have a passion for. And to that end, that's where I maintain that probably the best flying training on the field anymore is in the flying clubs, because that's where all the experienced instructors end up.
How many instructors do you have?
Well, we have a roster of probably 25 to 26 instructors. And across that roster, there are probably 15 of those are part-time. There are people that want to do flight reviews, instrument proficiency checks, some tail wheel training, things like that. And there's probably 10 to 12 of them that are dedicated full-time people, that when you sign up with them to do a rating, a private or an instrument rating, a commercial, they're going to stick it through. But the thing is that there are people that do this because they enjoy it. Everybody, and without a doubt, the one common thing is everyone that teaches the club does it because they like it, not because they have to. And then they're free. They have that freedom to find, to bite off how much of the apple they want.
And so it sounds like your instructors in the club then would be every bit as passionate as those young go-getters at a flight school that are going towards the airlines, but maybe a different type of passion.
Well, the passion is to make new pilots. And, I get a perverse satisfaction every time one of my students passes a check ride. I'm like, aha, another pilot's in the world, And that's worth more than any money I've ever made in doing this.
I think that's your natural teacher talking right there.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
Great. Now, why would somebody pick a club like this to train when there are so many schools out there? I'm talking about a private pilot, like a kid, for instance, that wants to have a career in aviation. Why might they choose to train at a club versus one of the larger flight schools out there that has incentives such as financing, cadet programs, guaranteed airline interviews, and stuff like that?
Well, that's a good question. And certainly, with I'll call it the alignment and consolidation of corporate flight training that we see today. Getting an airline interview may be attractive to young people. It certainly looks good in print when you read it in the ad, but our mission is to teach people to fly well. And so you can get all the same ratings you get at the flight school here, and you'll get better training. And with the training, my philosophy is this, that with the training, there's no barrier to you getting the job or the job you want. And I think the fallacy is that, okay, this place, if I spend a lot of money here to go here, and it's generally more expensive at the schools, they're going to give me this interview and I'm going to get a job. And there's no guarantees there. But it looks good when people start to do it. So I'm kind of a consumer beware guy. I'm really a let the buyer beware when it comes to these kind of programs. And I'm not trying to be negative against the flight schools at all. But all the glitters is not gold. And the best training is not going to be there. It's going to be here. It's going to be at another club where they're experienced instructors. Partially because things aren't so standardized here. Okay, one of the things I have one of my big passions is teaching people to be mature adults. Young people that come here, they're going to learn how to fly an airplane. They're not going to learn how to be walked out to an airplane like Romper Room and pretty much handed the book and walked back to the office and the book's taken from them and all the numbers are done for them. They'll learn how to do things for themselves. And that, as a parent, that's been a big thing for me, for my children to grow up. And my kids are all young adults now. My youngest is 22. My oldest is 26 years old. And, my thing is more than them learning some academic skills that are okay, but is for them to learn how to be functional members of society here. And that's, in this day and age, more important than ever. And especially in aviation, I don't know of any other field where you really have to, I don't know of any other field that requires more adult judgment than aviation. There is not a place on the planet. So in this field of aviation, being able to be functional, make decisions for yourself, we all know, all the concepts of aeronautical decision making. When you're flying an airplane and things go bad, there's nobody there to help you. Mom and dad can't do it, and your flight instructor probably is not going to be able to help you either. So being able to do critical thinking and all that is just hugely important in this field. And I think we developed that in the flying clubs.
Sounds like aviation then can be a catalyst for a young person to grow into an adult.
Almost more than anything else, I would say that this is a maturing ground for young kids to grow into pilots. And I've seen it over and over again.
Absolutely. How is aviation, since you mentioned your children and growing into young adults, how has aviation played a role in their upbringing in your family? Well, it's that thing, they have unlimited access to airplanes and flight instruction or whatever. And my son, he took about 25 hours of flight training when he was very young, probably like 12 years old. And he enjoyed it for a bit, but, actually he's moved on. He's working on a computer science degree and he's interested in cars. So that's fine. That's just fine. I like cars too.
Yeah, so do I. But I like airplanes more and he likes cars more. So
maybe we can somehow prove scientifically that it is in fact a specific gene. We can isolate the pilot gene. Now, tell us in the club some of the fun things that you guys do. Fly-ins, fly-outs, barbecues, tea parties, what do you do?
We do all that stuff. And the club's a fun place to be. We do, not only do you learn to fly here, but it's a place for you to continue to fly once you're done. All right? And that's a compare and contrast of the flight training establishments versus flying clubs. The clubs have a dual mission. One is to provide training, and we've already talked a bit about that. But the other part of the mission is to provide an environment for people to be able to grow as pilots. So when you're done with the training, you can continue to rent the airplanes, and they're here for you to take on trips and to go exercise your pilot rights and responsibilities to go out in the world and aviate. And to that end, we support an environment of collegiality and kind of a family. We're a big family here, and we do a lot of social events. We do barbecues, and we do over long weekends. We do club fly-ups to different airports, and that gives that gives kind of a safe space for people that aren't sure. They're afraid to kind of get out of their safe zone to go up as a group in airplanes, and we all land at the same airport about the same time, and we all go about the same route, and it kind of helps people with their decision process and get over their reticence to do something new, because human beings are such creatures of habit, and we're also the creatures of our own demise, because we love routine, but then after a while we start to hate the routine, but we don't know how to break out of it. So here's a good way to do that.
So tell us about some of the unique airplanes that you have in the club.
Well, here's another good aspect of flying clubs is now, clubs have a wide variety of airplanes, and it's pretty much depends on what's available in the area. Our club has, a lot of the standard airplanes everyone flies every day. They've got 172s, Cessna 172s, and they've got Cessna 182s, and we've got the Piper Cherokees and all that, which are kind of the meat potatoes of, going to get your $200 hamburger and learning to fly and all that. And those are great. But we also have other airplanes that, typically don't exist in flight school environments. And I hate to keep bringing up the flight schools, but you're going to find cool rental airplanes in flying clubs anymore. There aren't a lot of FBOs around here that rent airplanes. But we have tailwheel airplanes. You get tailwheel training here. We have 2 Citabrias. And Citabria, for those of y'all that don't know, is a high-wing tail dragger airplane that does light aerobatics. So the word Citabria is the word aerobatic spelled backwards, by the way. So if you ever see aerobatic in your rearview mirror, it's probably a Citabria tailgate you. Anyway, so we have that. We have multi-engine airplanes, so you can do your multi-engine training. We have light sport airplanes available. We don't currently have one, but we've had them in the past. And for the people that are looking for just kind of wiggle their toes in the water, you can always get a light sport rating. And we also have a helicopter available. We're kind of affiliated with a helicopter flight school here, Blade and Wing Aviation, and we have kind of a reciprocal agreement that club members have discounted access to flight training in the helicopter, and can just rent the helicopter and the instructor to go fly around if they want to just try a helicopter flight. It's as easy as scheduling it on our scheduling system, because those assets are all included in the same scheduling system the club airplanes are. So it makes it pretty seamless and easy to do that. I'm pursuing a rotor wing rating now too, because I see that as an extension of the flight training I do now, and I think that I'd like to be able to formally be able to offer helicopter training in the club. And then, right now we're affiliated with a flight school that is here, but, I see in the not too distant future of actually having a helicopter in the club roster. And those are, so I don't know any other place where you can get that kind of variety of training or the variety of experience here.
Sure. What are your club dues like?
Club dues our club dues, I think, are some of the best deals going in aviation. Once again, everyone thinks that everything in aviation is very expensive, and for the sum of $38 a month, you can be a member of the club. You'll save that in the first hour you fly an airplane here over what some of the rates are at the flight schools. So it's not real expensive to be a club member.
Sounds good. How can people get in touch with you if they want to join the club or learn how to fly here?
Well, we've got a very nice website, very informative, and that website is the web address is PCFlyers, FLYERS.org. That's a good first contact for anybody to go to, and it details the fleet of the airplanes. It has all the current pricing of the airplanes on it. Also has pages with detailed information about how to start the process of learning to fly, what we're all about, kind of our bylaws and our rules, so you know everything coming in, and you can always refer back to that. Also, my email address is on there, and for those of y'all that want to know it, it's jeff@pcflyers.org, surprisingly enough. And you can call the club phone number, which I actually don't know off the top of my head. I'm embarrassed to say because I never call it, but check the website. That goes directly to my cell phone, and 9 times out of 10 I'll answer it. The only times I don't answer is when I'm in an airplane flying.
Sounds good. Can you just join online, or do you have to show up?
You can. You need to show up because we need to get some documentation. We need government ID. It's a post 9/11 world, and we have to verify who people are. And if you're if you're a flight student, a government ID is all you need to get started with your flight training. If you're an existing pilot, we need to obviously get a copy of your pilot certificates and your medical and all that, and we keep all that on file and actually track the expiration dates of your medicals and your flight reviews. So you got to come in at some point to just let us make copies of your docs. But that's a 20-minute visit. The actual completion of the application form can be done online, and you can be a club member without ever even showing up on the premises as far as being on the roster.
Well, sounds good. Well, I appreciate your time, Jeff. This has been extremely informative, and I hope it gives people a lot to think about when they're trying to decide how they want to do their training.
Well, thanks, Brandon. Thank you for spending your time and coming to interview us and talk about the Flying Club. It's great.
All right, special thanks to Jeff White for his comments there in that interview. Lots of good stuff. And thanks to Swedish Andreas. He now has the distinction of being the very first audio feedback ever on the show. And thanks to the crew of Alaska 250. I don't know your names, guys, but I really appreciated the VHF Shoutout. That was really cool. And if anybody wants to submit anything to the show, you can do it. You can do what they did. You can do it in audio format. You could email me. You could like and leave a comment on our Facebook page. Or if you're flying by, I guess the VHF method is cool too. Hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. Anyway, no matter what method you choose, I'll do my best to get you on the show. And if you have suggestions for show topics or individuals you'd like me to interview, social media you want me to share, send it on in. If you want to get in touch, the best way, of course, is go to the website, and that's podcastingonaplane.com, and you'll find links to all the social media, or you can email me directly straight from there. If you're liking what you're hearing, the best way, of course, to keep up is to subscribe, and you can do that through iTunes, or we're on Stitcher now as well. And if you don't have either of those, you can go straight to shoutengine.com, and you can stream straight from the media host there. Subscriptions and ratings, of course, make all the difference in podcast land, so I ask that you please subscribe, and you get new episodes as soon as I release them that way, too. Well, that's all for now. Thanks again for listening. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between podcasting on a plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI. Nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.